Nobody warned you about this part. The part where doing everything right still leaves you behind. The part where effort stops being admired and starts being ignored. The part where you realize that grinding quietly doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible, and no one prepares you for the moment when you look around and understand that the world doesn't clap for consistency, it replaces it, because this is the stage nobody talks about. The stage after motivation, after hope, after discipline. When you've already sacrificed sleep, comfort, relationships, peace, and still find yourself standing in the same place while others pass you with less effort and more reward, and nobody tells you that this moment will feel personal even though it isn't, that it will feel like failure even when it's just reality doing what it always does, which is move on without explanation, because the truth is nobody warned you that loyalty would become irrelevant, that patience would be mistaken for weakness, that waiting your turn would quietly remove you from the line. And the hardest part isn't the struggle, it's the silence that comes after the struggle when you realize nobody is watching anymore, nobody is impressed, nobody is coming to rescue you, and the praise you thought would arrive someday never does. Because nobody warned you that the world doesn't reward effort, it rewards timing, visibility, leverage, and results. And if you don't have those, your story becomes background noise. And that realization hits hardest at night when you replay every decision and ask yourself how you did everything you were told and still ended up here. And nobody warned you that self-improvement would eventually isolate you, that growth would distance you from people who liked you better when you were small, controllable, harmless. And nobody warned you that becoming stronger would make you less relatable and more alone, because people don't celebrate your discipline. They resent the mirror it holds up to their excuses. And nobody warned you that your hunger would outgrow your environment, that your ambition would make conversations feel shallow, that your pain would become inconvenient to others once it stopped being inspirational. And nobody warned you that the moment you stop being useful, you stop being remembered, that value in this world is conditional and expires quickly. And nobody warned you how humiliating it would feel to realize you were replaceable the entire time, that your position was never secure, that your presence was tolerated, not required. And nobody warned you that trying harder doesn't always change outcomes. Sometimes it just delays acceptance, because effort without leverage is just exhaustion dressed up as virtue. And nobody warned you that the rules would change mid-game, that what worked before would stop working without notice, and that adaptability matters more than loyalty, more than morality, more than effort. And nobody warned you that people would take credit for what you helped build and then slowly push you out of the frame. And nobody warned you how fast they would forget you once you were gone, how little impact your absence would make, how life would continue smoothly without you. And nobody warned you that this realization would break something inside you, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a slow collapse of meaning, where motivation stops responding, where goals feel hollow, where discipline turns mechanical. And nobody warned you that the most dangerous phase isn't when you're failing, it's when you're numb, when you keep going without belief, without expectation, without emotion, just momentum and habit. And nobody warned you that surviving this phase requires a different kind of strength, not hype, not quotes, not motivation, but brutal clarity. Because this is the phase where boys quit and men either disappear or evolve. And nobody warned you that you would have to unlearn everything you were praised. D4, that you would have to let go of needing approval, recognition, fairness, or closure, because none of those are guaranteed. And nobody warned you that bitterness would feel justified, that resentment would feel logical, that giving up would feel reasonable. And nobody warned you that this is exactly why most people never become dangerous, never become undeniable, never become free, because they interpret this phase as a sign to stop instead of a signal to change. And nobody warned you that this is where identity is stripped away, where illusions die, where you stop romanticizing struggle and start respecting strategy, where you stop asking why me and start asking what now. And nobody warned you that this moment, this exact moment when you feel overlooked, underappreciated, underestimated, is the last moment before you either accept being ordinary or decide to become untouchable. Because nobody warned you about this part. The part where nobody cares, nobody cheers, nobody explains, and yet this is the part that decides everything. Nobody warned you that after this realization settles in, after the anger fades and the sadness gets boring, something colder takes its place, something quieter and more dangerous. The understanding that fairness was never part of the deal, that the rules you followed were suggestions meant to keep you compliant, not successful. And nobody warned you that once you see this clearly, you can never unsee it, that innocence doesn't come back, that belief doesn't reset, because now every compliment sounds conditional. Every opportunity feels temporary. Every promise feels like it has an expiration date printed in invisible ink. And nobody warned you how exhausting awareness would be, how knowing too much would drain the joy from small wins, how you would stop celebrating milestones because you've learned how quickly they're forgotten, how easily they're replaced by the next headline, the next face, the next story. And nobody warned you that your dreams would start to feel naive, that goals you once chased with excitement would now feel transactional, strategic, almost cold, because hope without leverage feels irresponsible once you've been burned by reality. And nobody warned you that people would sense this shift in you, that they would call it arrogance, distance, ego, when really it's just detachment, the natural defense of someone who learned the hard way that caring deeply without control is a liability. And nobody warned you that the loneliest phase isn't when you're struggling. It's when you've outgrown the lies but haven't yet built the new truth to stand on, when you no longer belong to the world you came from but haven't earned your place in the one you're trying to enter. And nobody warned you that during this phase you'll be misunderstood by everyone. You'll look ungrateful to those who stayed comfortable, cold to those who stayed emotional, obsessed to those who stayed average. And nobody warned you that you'd start speaking less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you've learned how rarely words change outcomes. And nobody warned you that discipline without illusion feels heavy, that working without applause feels pointless at first, that grinding without a story to tell yourself feels empty. And nobody warned you that this is where most people secretly sabotage themselves, not dramatically, but subtly, missing one day, lowering standards, numbing the discomfort, because the pain of effort without validation feels worse than the pain of quitting with excuses. And nobody warned you that excuses are socially rewarded, that society is kinder to people who give up politely than to those who persist awkwardly. And nobody warned you that resilience would cost you likability, that intensity would cost you invitations, that ambition would cost you belonging, because people don't abandon you when you fail. They abandon you when you remind them of what they chose not to become. And nobody warned you that you'd have to choose between being understood and being effective, between being liked and being respected, between comfort and control. And nobody warned you that once you stop needing permission, once you stop explaining yourself, once you stop waiting to be noticed, life becomes simpler but colder, quieter but sharper. And nobody warned you that this is the phase where patience stops being passive and becomes predatory, where you stop chasing opportunities and start positioning yourself so they have no choice but to find you. And nobody warned you that this transformation would feel like betrayal to your old self, to your values, to the version of you that believed effort alone was noble. But nobody warned you that survival doesn't care about nobility, it cares about results. And nobody warned you that this is where power actually begins, not in motivation, not in confidence, but in clarity so ruthless it removes hope and replaces it with strategy, because hope waits and strategy moves. And nobody warned you that the world doesn't fear hardworking people, it fears inevitable ones, the ones who stopped asking for recognition and started building leverage in silence. And nobody warned you that one day, much later, without announcement, without closure, the same people who ignored you will suddenly speak your name differently, with curiosity instead of comfort, with respect instead of familiarity. And nobody warned you how little that moment will matter when it arrives, because by then you won't be building for applause anymore. You'll be building because you understand something they still don't, that nobody was ever going to warn you, that this part was always meant to be discovered alone, and that the ones who survive it don't come back to explain it, because explanation is for those still hoping the world will be fair, and fairness was never the point. Nobody warned you that once you cross this line, once you fully accept that no one is coming and no rule is sacred, you stop arguing with reality and start studying it. And that shift is subtle but permanent, because now you don't ask what's right, you ask what works. You don't ask what's fair, you ask what's repeatable. And nobody warned you that this mindset would make you dangerous in a way that doesn't look loud or dramatic, but quiet, patient, surgical, because you stop wasting energy on outrage and start reallocating it into systems, leverage, positioning, and control. And nobody warned you that discipline feels different when it's no longer fueled by dreams, but by understanding, when you're no longer chasing a future you imagine, but engineering one that leaves less to chance. And nobody warned you that your emotions would flatten, not because you're broken, but because emotional volatility is expensive and you can no longer afford it. And nobody warned you that you'd begin treating time like a resource instead of a feeling, cutting people, habits, environments without explanation, not out of cruelty but necessity, because sentimentality slows execution. And nobody warned you that you'd stop romanticizing burnout once you realize most exhaustion comes not from working too hard, but from working without direction, without ownership, without upside. And nobody warned you that you'd start seeing patterns everywhere. how influence compounds, how attention moves, how power consolidates. And once you see those patterns, excuses start sounding childish, even your own, and nobody warned you that accountability becomes lonely because it removes the comfort of blame. Because when you accept that outcomes follow structure, not intention, there's no one left to be angry at except the version of you that didn't adapt fast enough, and nobody warned you that you'd grieve that version quietly, not with tears, but with a kind of internal burial, acknowledging that they did their best with the information they had, and then letting them go without ceremony and no. Body warned you that from this point forward, progress would feel anticlimactic. Because real momentum rarely feels exciting. It feels boring, repetitive, almost suspiciously calm. And nobody warned you that confidence stops feeling like fire and starts feeling like silence, a steady absence of doubt rather than a loud belief in yourself. And nobody warned you that when results finally start to show, you won't rush to share them, because you've learned how visibility attracts opinions, expectations, and interference. And nobody warned you that privacy becomes a form of power, that moving without announcement protects momentum. And nobody warned you that by the time people start asking how you did it, you won't have an answer they like, because the truth that you stopped waiting, stopped hoping, stopped caring about being understood doesn't fit into a quote or a caption. And nobody warned you that you no longer feel the need to prove how hard it was, because difficulty loses meaning once outcomes speak for you. And nobody warned you that at some point you'll look back at this phase, not with pride or bitterness, but with neutrality, recognizing it as the moment you stopped negotiating with life and started shaping it. And nobody warned you that this is why so few make it past this stage, not because it's impossible, but because it requires letting go of the comfort of being seen as good, loyal, patient, deserving, and embracing the risk of being seen as cold, intense, unapologetic, because nobody warned you that becoming effective would cost you your excuses, your innocence, and your need for validation. And nobody warned you that once you pay that price, you don't get a receipt, you just get results or silence. And you learn to be fine with either, because by now you understand something most never do. This part was never meant to motivate you. It was meant to strip you, refine you, and leave behind someone who doesn't need to be warned ever again. Nobody warned you that after all of this, after the stripping away and the quiet rebuilding, you would no longer feel the urge to announce who you are becoming. Because identity stops being something you declare and starts being something others infer from distance, from consistency, from outcomes that don't need explanation. And nobody warned you that ambition matures into something almost unrecognizable, something calmer and heavier, where urgency fades and precision takes over, where you move slower but miss less, speak less but mean more. And nobody warned you that restraint would become your default, not because you're afraid, but because you finally understand the cost of unnecessary exposure, unnecessary battles, unnecessary opinions, and nobody warned you that you'd begin to measure success, not by how far you've come, but by how little you're shaken when things don't go your way. Because stability becomes the new flex once chaos stops impressing you, and nobody warned you that setbacks would stop feeling like insults and start feeling like data, information to be processed rather than pain to be dramatized. And nobody warned you that this detachment would scare people, that they would mistake your calm for arrogance or your silence for indifference, because they're used to people who need to be seen struggling in order to be believed. And nobody warned you that you'd stop arguing your worth entirely, because arguments are for those still asking permission, and you're no longer asking. And nobody warned you that the hunger would still be there, just cleaner, sharper, less emotional, more exact, like a blade that doesn't shake. And nobody warned you that the greatest risk at this stage isn't failure but comfort, the subtle temptation to settle once you've proven you can survive. Because survival is seductive when you remember how close you were to breaking, and nobody warned you that you'd have to consciously choose ambition again, not from desperation this time, but from PR. Insightful. Because stagnation now would be a choice, not a circumstance. And nobody warned you that leadership begins internally, with standards you enforce even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. And nobody warned you that discipline becomes identity once motivation is gone for good. And nobody warned you that at some point you stop looking for signs, because signs are for people who still doubt their direction, and you've already committed. And nobody warned you that you'd develop a quiet intolerance for mediocrity in yourself first, that excuses would sound loud, that inconsistency would feel foreign, and nobody warned you that this internal order would spill outward, reshaping your environment without effort, because structure attracts structure, and chaos slowly removes itself when it's no longer entertained. And nobody warned you that you'd stop feeling the need to win every day, because you've learned how to outlast, how to compound, how to let time do the heavy lifting once the foundation is set. And nobody warned you that when you finally look back at the moment you felt invisible, overlooked, replaceable, it won't hurt anymore. Because that was the moment you stopped needing the world to see you and started building something it couldn't ignore. And nobody warned you that this was the real beginning. Not the hype, not the struggle, not the pain, but the quiet, disciplined, unromantic decision to keep going without applause, without certainty, without warning, because by then you've learned the truth that changes everything. The most important parts of life are never announced, never explained, never warned about. They're endured alone until you become someone who no longer needs to be warned at all.